Hi, I'm Matt and I'm a leader at Grace Church Beckenham, and it's great to welcome you to these COVID conversations. This is an interview between myself, my wife Mary, and a local minister called Matt Lloyd. We're asking the question, how do we handle anxiety? Mary and I know what it is to be gripped by anxiety. In 2011, Mary was walking down the street in broad daylight when a man who should have been in a mental institution stabbed her in the back. We're going to share this story. Matt Lloyd is going to interview us and then help us reflect on Christianity as the firm peg in the ground, post in the ground that we could hold on to in the midst of the storm. At Grace Church Beckenham, we're passionate about giving people the chance to take another step and find out more about Christianity. And if you want to do that at the end of this video, then the best place to head is our website, gracechurchbeckenham.org, and look out for COVID conversations. There are more interviews like this. There are also ways for you to get into the Bible for yourself or alongside others. We recommend the resource called Word 1-to-1, which is a guided read-through of John's account of Jesus' life. It's something you can use on your own, but we'd really love to facilitate you doing that alongside somebody else. And there's more information on that on the website. There are also short courses starting soon, like Life Explored. There's a video presentation to watch and a short passage from the Bible to look at alongside others and to discuss and ask questions about. We'd also love to know what you make of this, so do drop us a line. Again, contact details are on the website. But for now, here is this interview between myself, Mary, and Matt Lloyd.
Our question this evening, as we said, is how do we handle anxiety? Obviously, these are times that really fuel anxiety. Questions about our health and our finances, even the basics of just going to the shops or turning on the news, just create a level of anxiety that maybe we haven't experienced for a while. I guess it's worth saying that anxiety is a problem of significance that predates COVID-19. So it's not just something that's come about in the last couple of months. Studies would show that mixed anxiety and depression is diagnosed as a problem within about 8% of the UK population. So here is one of the biggest mental health struggles in our society. That's what we're talking about this evening. And some would know that who are watching in a particularly chronic way, would know that very well. Others of us maybe in different ways, maybe we're able to project that everything's fine on the surface, but deep down, I would guess every one of us watching and us three as we share this would know to a different degree anxiety in our lives. So we hope that this evening is, of course, brought about by the current crisis, but we hope that it's just relevant to the shape of our lives generally. Well, look, without further ado, let's turn to Matt and Mary. Thanks very much for being willing to be interviewed this evening. We're mainly going to interview you, Mary. Matt, let me be blunt, you're mainly here for tech support. Yeah. You're mainly here for tech support, but we do want to hear from you at some point later. But Matt, go on, just start with you then. I've mentioned you've got 3 kids. How long have you lived in Beckenham?
Yeah, my dad grew up in the area, but we haven't lived here before. We've moved at the end of August last year, so we're sort of 8-9 months. It's just, it just feels forever ago, doesn't it? Like that, so much in the world feels like it's changed. 8-9 months, and been happy times helping out at Christ Church Bromley and helping out trying to get this Grace Church Beckenham off the ground.
Great. Mary, let's come to you. Some will have seen from the advertising what this evening is about. We'll get to that in a minute. But could you just set the scene for the particular incident, these events? Just set the scene for us in the year. It was 2011, wasn't it, that this event happened?
Yeah, so we'd been married about 6 months, and I'd moved to London 6 months before. Yeah, I'm a fairly exhausted mum of 3 small people at the moment, but so I look back on those days with
It's just another world.
It is another world. There was lots of, we lived not that far from Hampstead Heath. We went for lots of leisurely walks on Hampstead Heath, lions, and browsing really overpriced artisan bakeries at Hampstead High Street. It was a great time.
Okay, great. And so a happy time of life by temperament. How would you describe yourself at that stage?
It was a very happy time in life, and I wasn't by nature an anxious person. I mean, I worried about exams and things like that, but I wasn't ever afraid of going out by myself or anything like that. I was just about to start a PGCE, and it was just really looking forward to the next bit of life.
What was your PGCE? What was your subject or age group?
Early years, primary, tiny ones.
Okay, so homeschooling, sort of
It's in no way the same. Give me 30 4-year-olds and other people's children any day.
It's amazing when you've heard. She really believes that.
Okay. And Matt, what were you doing at this stage, work-wise?
So I just started working for a church in West Hampstead. So I was helping out doing some youth and student work and dog's body, but working for the church there.
Great. Okay, so it's 2011. You're living in Hampstead, 6 months into marriage. Mary, just if it's okay, just talk us through what happened. It was the 5th of January, was it that year?
Yeah, it was.
5th of January.
Yeah, so it's a very odd thing to talk about. So I was walking to a job interview. It was about 11:30 in the morning. I was walking down a busy main road near to where we used to live, and I was trying to find a place to cross this busy road. I remember doubling back on myself and clocking a guy on my right who I'd seen before walking down. And I was looking across the road, looking for a break in the traffic, and felt a blinding pain. And know now things we didn't know at the time, like he was extremely mentally unwell, and he just stabbed me with an 8-inch knife. So the memories are very blurry. I remember just staggering and screaming. I could see a woman walking towards me about 100 yards away, moving towards me very slowly, and I was screaming at her to help me. She was obviously very scared herself. I remember trying to work out where he was. I clocked him turning down a side alley, but wasn't sure if he was coming back. So I was frantically trying to work out where he was and how to get away from him. So at that point, a taxi slowed down next to me, and it turns out he'd seen the guy raise his hand and thought he was hailing him, so had seen everything happen. He and this woman managed to get me onto the floor of the taxi, the back of the taxi. Yes. What do I remember after that?
Well, just before we sort of go forward from where you were in the taxi, can I just ask a couple of questions? Just so were you still able to walk? I mean, do you mind if I ask? Was there was there a lot of blood? Were you crumpled on the ground? Were you able to?
Yeah, I think so. I remember I remember staggering around and then collapsing onto the floor of the taxi, or they kind of got me onto the floor of the back of the taxi, and I was obviously in shock and losing a lot of blood, and at that point I started to go in and out of consciousness. But I remember the woman who's next to me was sounding very distressed, and the taxi driver was on the phone to 999. So I've got, but I mean, my main memory is just of wondering if I was dying, if this was what it felt like to die. So the taxi driver got me to A&E fairly quickly.
Where was that? Just near?
That was the Royal Free, which was the nearest hospital in Hampstead. And by that point I was mostly out of consciousness, but remember a lot of kind of frenzied and busy activity around me. The main thing was just the pain. The pain was just overwhelming, and trying to communicate what had happened to the doctors. They had to insert a chest drain, which is a fairly chunky tube into my lung, so that was a lot more pain. So and then they blue lighted me to the Royal London, which is where they take all trauma cases in London. So that's the kind of the main details of what actually happened.
And just on this man as well, you said turns out he was unwell. Should he have been on the streets? Did they catch him? What? They did catch him.
He just walked out of his house, attacked Mary, and then just turned around and walked back in his house.
I mean, incredibly, he hadn't offended before, but was obviously in a pit. So he was admitted to a secure mental institution afterwards. And
you don't know much about him now?
No, I know his name was Petros. That's all I know about him.
I deliberately didn't engage with some of it. So he must have been so out of his mind that it almost feels like it. I don't know, it's not like some, like almost not like a human doing it. It's just
Okay, so where were we? You're in the Royal London. Let's just hit pause on you for a second and just switch to you, Matt, if that's okay. How did things unfold from your end?
So I was just working away at my desk at home, and the phone rang, unidentified number, picked it up, and you just, someone on the end of the phone saying something you just never even knew to fear, right? That, I'm really sorry, Mr. G. Jones, that this is the police, but your wife's been involved in a stabbing. And they kept using this phrase like critical but stable. And I just thought it just felt like such a contradiction in terms. I was like, well, you're either critical or you're stable. Like, give me more information. And they wouldn't give me any more than that. And I mean, it's just so, can't imagine how surreal it was, but this had happened sort of 100 meters from our house.
Right.
And they just said, Mr. G. Jones, just walk outside. And you sort of walk outside, and there are police all over the street, still looking for this man. Just very quickly, they decided to blue light me across to the Royal London as well. And to be honest, that freaked me out even more, because I was like, well, why is it so important that I get there immediately to see her? Like, is this because I'm about to have my last moments with my wife ever? Like, I remember being at a talk once someone gave at a church entitled "Why Does God Allow Suffering?" And the story had started with this guy Justin saying, 6 months into my marriage to my new wife, which is how long Mary and I had been married at the time, I was involved in a car crash. We were involved in a car crash, and my wife died. And my faith wasn't like falling apart, I don't think, but I just kept remember saying to God, please don't let me be a Justin. I don't want to be. Please don't make me like Justin. Yeah, please keep Mary alive. Yeah, I mean,
that's the nightmare. That's the nightmare factor.
Yeah, just don't know to fear that.
Yeah. So, Mary, back to you. When Matt got to you in hospital, do you remember what state you were in physically, if we just come to the physical side?
So physically, he thankfully had missed all of my major organs apart from my lungs. So I needed an operation and a whole lot of morphine and a week on a trauma ward, none of which I'd recommend. But they assured me that physically I would be okay within a few weeks. But I think for us, the difference between me leaving the house that morning and then Matt finding me in a hospital bed a few hours later was just totally earth-shattering. I was very glad to be alive and that it wasn't worse, but my mind was just in crisis.
Could we come to your mind then a bit more? What do you remember that you were thinking at this point? How did things just play out mentally? I was just so overwhelmingly frightened. I was just so frightened of what people could do to you, and I was frightened of dying. I was just plunged into a world of chaos. My life, with all of its relatively minor ups and downs, had been very straightforward and happy, and sheltered, and suddenly people just stabbed you for no reason in the street, and it I think it was only a week in hospital, but it was without a doubt the longest week of my life. It was I was surrounded by people with awful, life-changing injuries. I remember the woman opposite me, in the bed opposite me, had just had both her feet amputated because she tried to jump off a balcony. She had jumped off a balcony trying to kill herself. And it was just a terrifying place. Just little things like I had 2 chest drains inserted to drain the blood from my lungs. So whenever I had to leave my bed to go for an X-ray or whatever, I had to carry these 2 buckets of my own blood with me. It was just disturbing. Really, I was just so disturbed and so frightened. We're talking about this word anxiety this evening. How do we handle anxiety? Could you just focus on that for a bit for us? What was your experience of anxiety immediately after the event?
My experience was one of grief, that because safety is such a fundamental part of a person's well-being, isn't it? And you don't really appreciate it or notice it when you've got it, and then suddenly when you don't have it, it's awful. It feels awful. And I'm reminded how I felt then is there are a lot of similarities with how we feel now, that suddenly that safety has gone and it feels awful. It is like a kind of grief. And I think because it had happened, as Matt said, 100 meters from our front door, and it had happened at 11:30 in the morning, and in a safe part of London. Suddenly crisis just lurked around every corner, and the 1 in a million thing had happened. So now I just computed the odds very differently. It happened once, and those things weren't just things that happened to other people. So I was grieving not feeling safe anywhere, and I think I was also just grieving just feeling in control of my circumstances. Richard Dawkins has he says the universe operates with blind, pitiless indifference. And I really felt the sharp edge of that at that time, that this world was in chaos. If someone could just you know, be that far away from killing you, that's how far from my heart, then it was chaos. I had no control.
If it had been down a dark alley late at night, you might have thought, oh, there might have been something I could have done to,
right. Yes.
There was no control.
to stop this.
Yeah.
Yes.
But actually, yeah, just complete
Yes.
loss.
Yes.
Loss of control.
So that was sort of anxiety at the time.
Yeah.
How about just since? I mean, what's it, 9 years ago? How's anxiety sort of played out since that time?
Yeah. I think the anxiety that's really persisted is not necessarily for my own safety, although particularly at the moment we all worry about that, don't we? But the thing that really haunts me is the phone call that you got. That plays on my mind often, regularly. That yeah, what if you got that phone call?
Yes.
Not about stabbing, but just about anything. Just because, yeah, that we're not in control, are we? And I still, you know, feel the sharp edge of that sudden loss of feeling in control of my circumstances. The unthinkable could happen. So I think particularly after the birth of our eldest child, yeah, and that's a particularly anxiety-filled moment for any parent. But I think it was overwhelming at times because, yeah, the odds were different. I computed the odds differently.
And there were lots of moments in that first few months where anxiety was just overwhelming, just like, you know, the windows must be locked, the door must be locked. Is it definitely locked? Is it definitely locked? Like waking up in the middle of the night in a pool of sweat because of a nightmare. Like that has faded, but just that sense of loss of control is still there.
And you're living 100 yards. You're still living.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Walking past the spot.
Yeah, Matt made me do that fairly soon after. I mean, you couldn't. It was the main way to go anywhere where we lived. I would have had to walk past it. So yeah, that was a very important thing to do. That was a tiny baby step to a new normal. Yeah.
And then had there hadn't been terror attacks in the same way. Well, there had been, of course, but not stabbings in the same way that there was just before Christmas. Do you mind if I ask how do you experience those when that comes up on the screen now?
Yeah.
Does that give you flashbacks, or what's that like for you?
Yeah, I think it definitely fight or flight reaction comes in very strong. But I think we'll talk. One thing that really helped was not thinking in black and white and thinking in grey. It is really important to feed a panicked mind with grey. That the unthinkable is not likely to happen. And Matt was really good at making me do that. And especially when those headlines come up, these things happen. It is not likely to happen, and that is an important thing to compute.
Could you just wind the clock back for us? Matt, you've certainly said that when you were when you were in the police car, you're talking to God, you're thinking about that, you're a Christian. Mary, we haven't quite heard that from you. So could you just wind the clock back for us, Mary, and just tell us how you became a Christian?
Yeah, my parents are Christians, and I remember a few significant moments in my childhood when I wanted to know God like they knew God. I remember thinking, I remember specific moments of thinking that is a beautiful message, a message about a God who loves us to death. I believe that. I remember slightly older thinking, I really need this sacrifice that Jesus offers. I can't even live up to my own standards, let alone God's standards. But I also remember moments, especially as an older teen, of thinking, I don't want to hear this anymore. I remember one moment in particular listening to the Easter story and just thinking, someone else tells me the story, I'm just going to put my head through a brick wall. I just don't want to hear it anymore. But that was an important thing to realize. You know, you don't inherit faith from your parents. So I decided to go back to basics. I spent a lot of time at university really thinking about and examining the claims of Jesus, and yeah, became convinced intellectually that it was true, but also just blown away by the beauty of the message of the God of the universe loving me. Yeah.
And so how did that impact all of this?
Yeah, I think my faith had space for tragedy theoretically, but that this was a really major case of rubber hitting road. And I think my experience was really of someone holding on to a post in the ground in the middle of a storm. I think I really felt at the time like if no one was there, if my cries of why were really not to anybody, and I was wholly at the mercy of survival of the fittest, and just in a universe that was full of blind, pitiless indifference, then the nightmare was real. Like the worst thing could happen. I might be lucky, I might not be lucky. But I did have this post in the ground. I believed that God had made himself known in the person of Jesus, and he had shown me through him that he loved me, and that he was in control. And that wasn't wishful thinking for me, that was considered careful belief in the person of Jesus. And it really didn't stop me being scared. I would still wake up with these awful nightmares, not being able to move for fear. But one verse that really I clung to at the time was a verse that says, "The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid?" Which in some ways is a bit bonkers, because you have a lot to be afraid of, and really, you know, stabbing you in the back is not the worst thing a person can do to you. But I had this post in the ground, and that made a huge difference to the way that I suffered and the way that I experienced that anxiety, knowing in Jesus, God has shown me he loves me. He is near to me in Jesus.
Maybe just as a final question, just to bring us right up to today, COVID-19, of course, is creating a huge amount of anxiety for us all. It sounds sort of familiar in that it's this unseen threat that you were talking about, you know. So I'm wondering how you're processing anxiety today.
Yeah, I think I think I process it very similarly how I did back then to how I am processing it now. Partly just remembering that a loss of security, whether in my situation or in a pandemic, is a kind of grief, and it's okay to treat it as such. So people used to say to me, "Are you feeling back to normal now, back after it happened?" Which of course is a bit bonkers, because I was never going to go back to normal, but it was okay. This was a grief that was obviously not on the same scale as losing someone, but it was a grief, and I would never go back to the normal I knew before, but I could take baby steps in the direction of a new normal. I've already talked about thinking grey instead of black and white, but I think the most important thing back then and now was talking. Such an obvious thing to say, but so important. I remember someone talking to me about the idea that trauma is like your brain receiving a mountain of information in one huge chunk. Your brain is used to processing small molehill-sized pieces of information, and it just can't cope with the mountain. So talking to friends and family about what happened, talking to friends and family now, so important. I mean, the best thing that I did for anyone experiencing extreme anxiety was, of course, to talk to a professional. I spoke to a counsellor. It actually took 7 years for me to do that, but it was made such a huge difference, because it gave me time. I could really devote time to breaking down that mountain and making it, digesting it into pieces that my brain could manage. But I think the bottom line back then and today is that I really so strongly felt that if if the bottom line was just blind, pitiless indifference, then fear would genuinely take over. The world was in chaos, and I might be lucky, I might not be. The post in the ground was the critical difference back then, and it is the critical difference now. And it gives me two things. So it gives me the knowledge that there is a God who loves me and a God who is in control, but it also gives me confidence of life beyond death. And I mean, at 24 you feel invincible, don't you? And I found facing mortality in a pretty dramatic way for the first time just terrifying, because let's face it, just no one knows. You just don't know what will happen when you die. No one can tell us. But I had and I have deep lasting comfort, because these promises of heaven that Jesus gives are not wishful thinking. They're spoken by someone who I believe to be completely trustworthy.
Mary, thank you very much for being willing to share so honestly and publicly as well. We'll have some questions back to you in a minute, and Matt, you can explain again in a second how we'll do that. Just before that, I just want to reflect for just a couple of minutes on what Mary said. And I wanted to look especially at that verse that Mary mentioned. Matt, can we have that up on the screen? It's from Psalm 27, verse 1. And thank you. It simply says at the bottom there, "The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" Thanks, Matt. Let's just come back from that, if we may. And very simply, a stronghold for the ancient writer was probably a safe place, maybe a rocky outcrop where he could hide from his enemies. And in a sense, you and I have strongholds today, whether it's a bank balance or our health or our families. They're safe places that we hide. And I guess our anxiety is arising at the moment because our strongholds are being threatened. They don't look so strong right now. And so the question is, how can we handle anxiety? And the first part of the answer really is that we can't do it on our own. That's something of what Mary's shared this evening, that the Bible says that we're not designed to handle life on our own. In fact, anxiety grows when everything is up to us. So imagine that I was told in half an hour I had to play a piano concerto in front of 10,000 people. My anxiety would go through the roof because I barely scraped through grade 3. I'm not qualified. And in fact, the more that you said to me, Matt, it's over to you, the more you said, Matt, you've got this, the more my anxiety would grow, because I'll be trying to sort something out that is frankly beyond me. And I'll be feeling the pressure to sort it out on my own, to do something that I cannot. And what Mary is in effect saying this evening is that we're not designed to live in God's world without him. We're not meant to do life on our own. These big things of life and death, these big questions, mentally dealing with a trauma as Mary has, or the pandemic that we're facing at the moment, even just the basics of living, holding down a job, raising and protecting our children, are beyond us. Of course, maybe we've felt in control at some points, but the last 2 months, I guess, have shattered the illusion that we're ultimately in control of our lives. And as Mary said, would be a scary world if that was the case in a pitiless universe. The second part, really, of things is that anxiety recedes when someone is with us who really is in control, who's an expert, who's qualified to sort things out. So it must have been a tremendous comfort for Mary when a doctor, an expert, walks into the ward Or we might think of a scared child in the dark, and what do they want? Well, they want mummy or daddy to be near. And so anxiety fades in the presence of a person who comes to be with us, who's in control, who can sort things out. And I guess the question that we're facing at the moment is, who can we turn to today? Obviously, as Mary says, it seems very wise to just talk to people in our anxiety. That's a very practical thing that the Bible would encourage, or to seek the help of professionals, as Mary mentioned. But no MP or doctor or economist is qualified to sort out what we're facing at the moment, and nor are we. And the writer's fears fade because, well, Matt, could we have the verse again? He simply says that the Lord is my stronghold. He says, the Lord is the stronghold of my life. Thanks, Matt. In other words, friendship with God is our only secure eternal stronghold. And the reason for that is because he's the only one who's qualified, who's ultimately in control of this world, who can help us to navigate life and death. And that's what Mary was saying towards the end, that the pole in the ground is, it turns out, a person, is Jesus Christ, who the Bible describes as Emmanuel. That's one of the names he's given, which is God with us. In other words, God in Jesus came to be with us in this world. He experienced the vulnerability and the fears of this world. On the cross, he made himself ultimately vulnerable so that we could know God as our stronghold, so that our broken relationship with him could be mended. And the Bible says that Jesus Christ really is the expert on life. He's experienced all of the ups and the downs. He trusted God throughout. And he's the one who's qualified. He's the expert who's done something to fix it. And as Mary referred to, that the resurrection of Jesus really is the proof that he is able to defeat all of our fears and all of our enemies through his resurrection. In other words, we can trust him. So just before questions, I guess the summary is that our culture has thought that the further we are from God, the better we'll be. But actually, this verse is saying that the more absent God is as a secure, loving father, the more anxiety actually grows. And conversely, the more present he is in our lives, the more anxiety recedes. Of course, it doesn't make fears magically disappear. Mary would testify to that. Fears do remain. But Mary would say she knows who to turn to, and that she's not on her own. And I guess she'd say that any of us can link up with the God of the universe as our Father. And the first step is what Mary did, just to turn back to him. And then we'll be able to say with her, the Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom shall I fear?
Our prayer is that what we've just heard grips us and makes us think we need to take another step. This sounds amazingly serious and seriously amazing. I need to find out more. And the place to head is gracechurchbeckenham.org, and look out for COVID conversation links. On the links, you'll find ways to watch other videos, other interviews like this, stories of lives changed by Jesus. You'll also find ways to get into the Bible for yourself or alongside others. There's a resource called The Word 1-to-1. It gives you a guided read-through of John's account of Jesus' life. And it's something you could look at for yourself, or you could do it alongside someone else, and we'd love to help facilitate that. There are also courses that you could join starting soon, like Life Explored. It's a short DVD-based course, a short video presentation, and a chance to discuss in small groups a short passage of the Bible. And then there are ways for you to get in touch. We'd love to know what you think. Why not take a next step and check out the website?